All right, so welcome to this week's Zoom. We will be talking about sustainable fashion this week, as well as summarizing a bit of the past week of the CAS at-home waste reduction challenge. We're CAS Trips. We lead sustainable student trips around the world, and we're just spending the month challenging ourselves to make a change while we're at home.
And a bit about CAS Trips. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Student Challenges are what we're all about. So we decided to try and keep the positive impact going through the lockdown. We're a global community, so we thought the best thing to do was to come together and work on a waste reduction challenge. So we're now going into the third week of the challenge now. Of course, one of the key things of the IB is to think globally, act locally. So we think that this activity is perfect because if you want to make an impact globally, the best place to start is at home or in your local communities.
Absolutely. While we're spending more time at home, we want to keep the international student challenges alive. So you can find all the details about the various challenges that CAS Trips hosts on our website, castrips.org. Clicking challenges, and you can find this one by clicking the waste reduction challenge. If you want to stay in touch with us, I'm sending a link to a Google form into the chat for Zoom so that you can submit your email and you can hear some weekly updates about these challenges. Our at-home waste reduction challenge is mainly social media based, so you can find the various partner and tour guide at-home tips, tricks, and advice on our social media, as well as everything uploaded on YouTube for anyone to access. You can find all of this, like I said, on our website, castrips.org. And if you're participating and want us to share something that you are doing, let us know by tagging us at CASTrips or with our hashtag CASAthome.
Now, over the past week, we've been looking at reducing our food waste. So I just wanted to go over some of the submissions we received and some of the things that people started to do to make that change at home. We had a great response to the challenge this week, and we had some of the more simple things that people can do, like freezing food. It sounds obvious, but there's actually so much food that can be frozen and it keeps a lot longer that way. If you're not sure about what foods can be frozen, a simple Google search can help you determine what kind of things you can freeze, like soup stocks and bread and things like that can even be frozen. People started to reorganize their fridges and their pantries so that they've got the food that needs to be eaten first in the more visible parts of the fridge and the pantry, and avoiding the things that are going to expire sooner. We also had some innovative things, like some of the students making food from food that was nearly going off. So we had almond cookies made, we had almond milk made at home. We also had strawberry pies from strawberries that were nearly gone. If you cook something like that, then it's still perfectly edible, no problem. We also had quite a few of you introducing composting into your kitchen. So we received a lot of pictures of compost bins that have been set up with instructions on how to use it for the other members of the family. Some of the people were already very experienced at composting, and some of them were new to it. But a lot of the family members got involved, mums and dads and brothers and sisters and everything. So it's great because it's spreading, the impact of what we're trying to do. Also, some of the family pets benefited. So I saw a few photos of, dogs and cats getting chicken with their normal dry food. So I'm sure that the family pets are pretty happy with the food waste challenge as well, because they're benefiting from it. So these are the kinds of things we got this week. Your weekly submissions always get sent to wastereduction@castrips.org. So keep sending things in. All week, all through the week, you can send in your submissions.
Of course. A couple fun answers in the chat here in the Zoom. A lot of people are talking about how they're finishing all of their food and not leaving leftovers to throw away, which I think is the best way to start acknowledging what your food waste really is and how you can become more aware about it to make bigger changes and bigger steps down the line. So great suggestions, guys. What we are going to do now, we are going to change focus into what this week, the third week of our Waste Reduction Challenge is about, which is about sustainable fashion. So get ready for some wardrobe auditioning and upcycling, as well as some fashion redesigning ideas. And we're going to get started here with an interview with our main speaker this week. While this interview is going, if you have questions, please put the questions in the chat. For the first 10 minutes, we'll go through the questions. And if there's any really great questions, we will actually ask you as a student to come on and ask your question over video for Laura here. So submit your questions in the chat and pay attention to see if we ask you for a question. All right. So for now, we're going to introduce Laura Perez. She's a sustainability consultant with Salterbaxter, helping companies get set up and become more sustainable, including working with some big fashion companies that we will get into and discuss today. Welcome, Laura.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, of course. So as Neil has already talked about, I'm a consultant within the sustainability field. So essentially we get big or small companies and brands coming to us with their challenges within sustainability and ask us to help them provide them solutions. So for example, with some companies, we calculate their carbon footprint. We also help them identify which are the areas where they can make an impact, a positive impact, and where they're making a negative impact. And then we provide them recommendations on how they can improve this. So yeah, my journey a long time ago started very similarly to everyone's journey here through the IB. That's how I got kind of involved with sustainability and wanting to make a difference. So I think it's great that all of you are here, and hopefully you can learn something really good and insightful today to take with you on your journey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really great to have someone with similar experience that understands what everyone here is going through, and just hoping to share your expertise. So we really appreciate you being here, Laura. My first question is definitely about the fashion industry. And I think for most of us, it's much larger and more complex than we're aware of. Can you give us just a bit more detail about what it actually takes to produce our clothes?
Yes, of course. You're very right. It's a very complex industry. So I suppose the best way to speak about it is talk about the different phases and how a garment of clothing gets to where we are right now. So there's lots of different phases, starting from the sourcing of the materials. So for example, if we're thinking about cotton, cotton obviously involves quite a lot of farming. It involves pesticides and a lot of water use, because it's a very it's a crop that requires a lot of water. And then there's a lot of transportation involved in getting the crops to the processing sites, where the garments get processed and they get color added to them, and they get cut and shaped in different ways. And then they will go to the actual shops or warehouses, which is where we then go and purchase our clothing. Obviously right now, a lot of it is actually going online. So there's another kind of factor to think about there, of the transportation involved with getting all the clothes to people's homes, which emits a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because of the vehicles driving that around. And then finally, after we've bought the clothes, we've used it, we wash it many times, finally what we do is we get rid of it and we dispose of it, which is, I suppose, where this waste challenge comes in, and how we can become more conscious of how we can dispose of our clothing in a way that's not as impactful on the environment. And then I suppose to just add to the complexity of that is that all these phases are happening all over the world with lots of different people involved. So just to give you an idea, a typical pair of jeans from a global brand will have been touched by at least 100 people before it gets to you in the shop, ranging all the way down to the cotton growers in India, for example. So yes, complex, massive, really, really big field to wrap your head around.
Yeah, you've mentioned the carbon dioxide and the transport. What other negative impacts linked to worldwide clothing production should we be aware of? And how does the clothing directly affect the environment and our climate?
Yeah, definitely. There's the doom and gloom doesn't just end there. There's actually a lot more impacts involved. So outside of just the carbon footprint of a garment of clothing, one of the biggest issues is actually water. So when our clothing gets produced, there's a lot of illegal dumping of toxic wastewater that go into the bodies of water that are natural, like lakes and rivers. So this will obviously damage those ecosystems, and it will affect the animals living in those waters, but also the livelihood people who depend on that water for survival. And a lot of the times this happens in developing countries where they're not really as protected by the law. Another issue with water is actually the vast amount of water that's used. So to give you an idea, to make 1 kilo of cotton, it takes around 20,000 liters of water. So it's some of the materials are very, very water intensive. Then finally, moving on to the theme of waste, there's not only issues with the production of the clothes, but actually how do we dispose of them? And a lot of the times we think we may be donating them, but then they end up in landfill sites and they get incinerated. And if they do get donated, a lot of the times they actually travel to other countries. So Africa is actually a continent that takes a lot of our second and even third hand clothes. So obviously the transportation of that will emit even more carbon emissions. Not to mention that a lot of the, if we do dispose of them and they go to landfill sites, the synthetic fibers are actually not biodegradable at all and take a long time to decompose, so up to 200 years. So we want to avoid at all costs throwing clothes away. We want to reuse them, recycle them as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest goal for this week's challenge for the students. They're going to be looking at their wardrobes and looking a lot of their clothing, what it's made of, especially the materials. And I think the goal is to make sure that nothing ends up in the landfill, which is a great way to summarize it, indeed. Now, we know that Salterbaxter works with a lot of various companies, including some larger companies like H&M who work in fast fashion. Now, what do you think what are some of the main driving factors for companies like H&M to move from that fast fashion into things that are more sustainable? What are their biggest challenges as well?
That's a really good question and a very relevant one that actually is not just in the fashion industry, it's everywhere. So going back to just fashion, the fashion industry, 2019 actually saw this industry move really rapidly, and a lot of big brands started to make more pledges and commitments to becoming more sustainable. And that pressure actually comes from a lot of different people and stakeholders. So the first one is all of you are stakeholders to brands. You as consumers can put pressure on companies and demand them to be more transparent with how they are improving the processing of their clothes and just demanding more eco-friendly clothing. So that's one pressure. There's also a lot of pressure from NGOs and activists. I'm sure we've all heard a lot of Greta Thunberg in these past few years, and Extinction Rebellion may be more relevant in the UK, but a lot of NGOs like that are putting a lot of pressure on companies to act and act now. And then there's a lot of, from the law perspective and regulation, there's a lot more demanding regulation coming into place, and so things like the Modern Slavery Act, which is essentially just asking companies to look at their supply chains and just make sure that there's no slavery there, because we don't want that to happen. That's really bad. And then so those are the different types of pressures that companies have been under that have caused them to start to think about their fast fashion and move towards more sustainable solutions. And then the challenges, again, going back to the complexity of supply chains, a lot of the times companies don't actually have visibility of where their clothes come from. So they can trace it back to the factories, but they can't actually trace it back to the farms themselves, because there's subcontractors involved and a lot of legal kind of paperwork that just makes it really complicated. So that's one thing. And then the other one, which is actually really important, is the mindset of the consumer. So as a company, they do have responsibility of changing our behaviors as well. Obviously it comes from us, but it can come from them too. So they've got a challenge in changing the consumer mindsets to not buy as much fashion, because even sustainable fashion, is that really sustainable if everyone's buying one garment of clothing per month or per week? So it's really about changing the mentality to not, for a consumer to not need so many clothes.
And that's the challenge that we have this week is getting the students to, you know, question their own consumer habits as well, and question, you know, their own wardrobes and how they've been consuming things. I just wanted to move on to something more topical. The whole reason we got this challenge together was because of COVID-19. How is it affecting the clothing industry worldwide? And what do you think will be adapted, or what changes do you think will come out of this moment that we're going through right now?
Yes, another really good and relevant question. So immediately, in terms of short-term thinking, sales have obviously plummeted. No one's really dressing up for themselves at home. No one's really buying as many clothes. Sure, granted, some of us are shopping more online, but on the whole, people are not buying as much as we used to. So that's kind of the first effect, COVID effects, that a lot of these brands are feeling at the moment. And in terms of how they need to adapt to these short-term challenges, first and foremost, they need to protect their employees and supply chain relationships. So just make sure that their employees are safe and that they are keeping those supply chain, those relationships with their suppliers really strong, because a lot of the times the suppliers are the ones that are not as well protected in their countries and need a lot more help. And there's even issues right now of companies placing orders, but they haven't paid those orders yet. Well, obviously everything has stalled. So there's a lot of issues there of not having that money to help out those suppliers and farmers that really need it. But then looking in terms of the medium term and long term, really what the industry needs to do is embrace a new reality. So things are going to be different and things are going to change a lot. Sure, sales will start to go up, but they're probably not, or predictions say that they're not going to be as high as they used to be, for a variety of reasons. So one of them is consumers. They're seeing consumers are shifting their values and they're shifting their mindsets when they're shopping. So before COVID happened, people were already questioning everything and, you know, our company's doing enough, etc. Now this is going to be accelerated even more, because now we've gotten into this mentality of just having potential for you, because obviously that's what COVID has caused us to do. Let me know if my connection isn't well, because it's giving me a little message. And then what companies need to start doing is they need to be creative and innovative. They might have to start thinking of new business models. What worked before, where they essentially want to sell as many clothes as they can, may not be the new normal anymore. That was business as usual. Now we're moving into a new era. So we're probably going to see companies start to kind of rethink their company essentially and how they operate. Yeah, so that's just kind of a few of the things that we can expect to see companies to start doing and being more vocal about.
Well, the future definitely looks interesting. We've talked about the companies. Now can we move to the idea of the power of the individual? So what can individual people do to help the situation?
Definitely. So I think when it comes to the individual, the very first thing that we need to do is acknowledge that we can difference. I think a lot of the times we get caught up in the idea that companies can make a much bigger difference. They're the ones that need to be doing stuff, but actually it's everyone, it's the collective. So it's really about acknowledging and understanding that you've got the power to make a difference as a consumer, because brands really care what you think. And there's, I mean, a lot of different ways to minimize your impact, but essentially it all boils down to becoming more conscious when you're shopping. So in the same way that a lot of people are starting to look at the ingredients when they're buying food, you can do the same with clothes. You can look at the ingredients of clothes or the materials. You can start looking at what fibers went into them. You can start looking at what initiatives companies have launched to ensure that the production of those fibers are sustainable. You can start supporting those brands that are doing really good work. And the audit that you guys have to do this week is a really, really good way to start. I've got a few more tips that are more student focused. Shall I go into those?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, I've got a few that I've kind of started to think about myself, but there's definitely a lot of different things that you can do as a student, and obviously you may not have the same budget as someone who's professional and working and an adult, but there's definitely a lot of stuff. So for example, there's really good secondhand charity shops out there that you can buy from. There's a lot of social media pages that sell secondhand clothes that are really good quality, or even firsthand clothes that maybe someone has never worn before. Clothes swaps is a really good one. If you've got lots of friends who have clothes, we all have that one friend who has too many clothes for their own good, and that might be yourself. And that's the kind of initiatives that you should speak about with your friends, and you can maybe even pay them, for example, to get a bunch of their clothes if they're not wearing them anymore. And other things are just kind of looking to spend a little bit more on clothes that will last longer. So really thinking about that quality and thinking ahead. Is it worth buying this top from Primark that's only going to last me a few seasons, or shall I invest in a brand that's a bit more expensive and it's going to last me like 5 to 10 or more seasons? And finally, one that I think quite fun is really to just get creative. There's a lot of way to repurpose your clothes, and there's a lot of really good tips and ideas out there from influencers and bloggers and social media, for example, on how to use winter clothes in summer and vice versa, and how to pair stuff, how to cut and shape clothes differently to make them a bit more fun and trendy. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of tips, but essentially I think it boils down to just becoming more mindful in everyday shopping. Really, it shouldn't just be clothes, it's every kind of consumer or choice you're making as a consumer.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very complex, but it's good to be aware of, isn't it? Yeah.
Definitely, yes. Information is power.
Exactly. So we have a few questions just to get a little bit more information out of you while we wrap up here.
Yeah.
So first, I would like to bring on Liv, who asked her question in the chat.
Hi
there.
Hi, Liv.
So my question was about how do you change their mindsets?
The companies, the big ones. That's a very good question. So I think one of the things that there's a lot of different things that you can do, but the first one is, again, as a consumer, you can demand companies to, or you can just your purchasing decisions. If you're buying those clothes that are organic cotton or organic clothing, your money's already going there. So the companies will understand, hey, this is what people are interested in. This is where the demand is. And if you decide to maybe not buy from brands and companies that are not doing really well, then that's you as a consumer voicing your opinion. There's also a lot of kind of charities that you can join, or NGOs. So if you really believe in a cause, there's a lot of groups out there that are making themselves known and making a lot of noise, and having students backing that up and helping out with that is actually quite impactful for companies, and they're definitely listening. So it's about keep making noise on your opinion, and making your opinion known through the clothes that you are buying.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much, Laura. We will bring on another student to ask a question. Hudson.
Thank you. How do we know if we have plastic in our clothes?
That's a really good question. So there are certain fibers that have plastic in them. There's actually what I'll probably do after this, there's a really good guide out there that shows you all the materials that have a negative impact and that you should probably buy less of. And then the materials that have a positive impact. So when you go and buy your clothes, you can read the label and you can decide, is this going to be impactful? Is this going to use a lot of water to get here? And plastics is definitely one of those. So I can send that over to you, Neil, and you can circulate that. I found that guide quite helpful, and I'm sure you guys will as well.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link that in our weekly email that we send to the students on Fridays. So if you're submitting your worksheets to us, you will get that email on Friday with a link.
Yeah.
Great. All right, one last question to finish up. We'll bring online Michelle here.
Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Just wondering if you can recommend any websites or specific suppliers that we can access to help us with the choices of like built to last sort of clothing or like lifetime guarantees.
That's a good question, and even I struggle with that myself, because even, you know, the brands that you maybe thought were good will suddenly get something in the news where you're like, oh, my whole world is upside down. But there's definitely certain brands that have always been known. Patagonia is a really big one. They only ever use organic cotton, and they're very known in this field for that. H&M now has a new line that's H&M Conscious, but again, I haven't actually looked into a lot of detail to see whether, you know, there's any loopholes, because a lot of the times there's a lot of greenwashing, which is them saying they're doing really good stuff, but then when you look into it, it's actually not that good when you look at one thing or the other. But there's certainly some good kind of articles I've seen. Sorry, just another one that I saw, Levi's. So Levi's has been quite good in removing water wherever the production of their jeans. So they're quite known for doing a lot of work in that space. And actually, I was reading about another one, Alternative Apparel. Again, another one that uses organic cotton. But there's lots of different kind of things that you can think about, like if you're interested in, you know, minimizing water impacts or minimizing carbon footprint, or they're all doing different things, but there's definitely some brands that will stand out more than others. Again, I'll link up a few articles where I've seen kind of a list of the, you know, close to shop for, close to not shop for.
Great, thank you. With that, we'll wrap up our interview with Laura. That has been very informative. I think for all of us, we had a lot of questions answered and know how to make a lot of different choices going forward, for certain.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
We will take what Laura mentioned and we will move on just to talk about what our challenge is this upcoming week and what you will find out more about in the worksheet. But Catherine will give a little bit of a summary for you.
Okay, so coming up this week, we're going to be talking about sustainable fashion. And I think the interview with Laura has given us some really good information to start with. We're going to focus on questions like, what is sustainable fashion? What's fast fashion? What is slow fashion? How does the way we do our laundry actually affect the quality of our clothes? Things like this. We're going to look at the impact of the fashion industry on the environment, and then we're going to analyze our own wardrobes and the fabrics that we have in our wardrobes, look at our behavior as consumers of fashion, and then we're going to take some photos, which is going to kind of put all of this into perspective somehow. Of course, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to reflect on the experience, find ways to come up with strategies to change our consumer behavior, minimize our impact on the industry, and help to make that change. We also have, for those fashion designer people out there, we have an upcycling challenge. So we want to take one piece of your clothing that you're not using or is old or something like that, and we want you to make something new from it. So we've got some ideas, we've got some links for you to have a look at to do that, and we of course want you to send the photos of what that looked like before and what it looks like after, and we'll definitely receive some interesting things if the past couple of weeks are anything to go by. Indeed. If you have any questions about next week's challenge, you can ask us some questions now in the chat.
Yeah, we'll be happy to answer them while we wrap up here. Like every week, you can submit your submitted worksheets, the photos, and the reflections to our email, wastereduction@castrips.org. And you can find all of the information for the challenge on our website, castrips.org, underneath the challenges, the Waste Reduction Challenge. There has been a lot of amazing content from our various partners coming online, especially on YouTube. So if you're looking for some fun ideas of what you can change up in the kitchen or different actions you can do to reduce your waste, definitely check it out. It's some great inspiration, even more than what we have here in the Zoom call. With that, stay in touch by showing us your challenges and your sustainability projects using hashtag #CastAtHome and tagging us @CastTrips on Instagram or Facebook. So good luck with your sustainable fashion challenges this week. And we look forward to seeing what crafts you produce, just like Emery said in the chat. So thank you for joining us this week, and we look forward to seeing you again on Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.